Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, you're listening to the Great Women in Compliance podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network with Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine. I'm Lisa Fine, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Neta Meidav, who is the co-founder and CEO of Vault Platform. Vault is a reporting and resolution platform which is intended to be a safe space to report any form of misconduct in the workplace, including harassment, bullying, discrimination, and racism, as well as fraud and corruption. The system also includes a designated case management system to enable ethics and compliance teams to manage investigations. Neta's story is really interesting. She became interested in the reporting of workplace allegations out of her own personal experience. After college, she had a dream job, which she eventually left because she was a victim of sexual harassment. A few months later, she found out that another person had the same experience with the same harasser, and it always stuck in her mind. When the allegations came out against Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement started, she thought about what happened to her and whether or not there'd be a better way to report incidents, and that eventually turned into Vault Platform. In a time where we're relooking at race discrimination and other systemic concerns, it's a particularly relevant time to talk about this. So we are so pleased that you are here. So as we get started, can you just talk a little bit about your journey from your first role in Israel to starting Vault?
Sure thing. And first and foremost, let me thank you, Lisa, for inviting me onto your podcast. I wanted to be on the Women in Compliance podcast since I realized I am myself a woman in compliance. So really appreciate being here today. To talk about my journey from that first experience in my first ever job out of university to founding my own company that deals with speak up and better speak up for the workplace. As you've said, I had the dubious pleasure of experiencing sexual harassment firsthand in my first ever job out of university. And at the time, I didn't even consider reporting it. Yes, the organization had the traditional hotline in place, and I could have knocked on HR's door, but it was very clear to me at the age of 22 that I am not going to do that. It was much easier for me to leave. And my life actually took on a very different course. Starting that moment, I found myself in the UK studying for a master's degree and been living in the UK since. And I ended up having this really incredible career that I'm grateful for in the British government. I worked on climate change issues. So you could see a bit of a theme coming up here where I'm attracted to difficult, hairy problems, and I love being on the solution side. And I got the biggest honor was the opportunity to sit on the negotiation team for the UK and the EU in the climate talks during the Paris when the time the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, and never even dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur. But when the Weinstein story broke, and we've just heard about this new movement called Me Too, my experience from all these years back came back to kind of haunt me in a way, and I thought about what it would have taken for me to come forward and report at the time, and I found myself really obsessing about the problem. So yes, of course, there was the obvious problem of the fact that it was revealed how the depth and breadth of the sexual harassment problem in the workplace was revealed during those days. But what was more interesting to me was the underlying problem of lack of trust in the workplace and the fact that misconduct at large is not reported internally. So I started looking into the data behind it, and I started researching the subject quite heavily, and I found that 75% of all misconduct gets unreported. Only 11% of reporting is happening through the hotline and the associated web form. So the system is clearly not working in its best, neither for employees nor for the companies in which they work. So I went on to establish Vault, which was born with a mission of lowering the reporting barriers and infusing trust into the workplace by enabling innovative technology. And above all, what we wanted to do is to become the most employee-centric reporting solution out there, because we realized that the journey really must start with the employees. Really must start with more speak up and more psychological safety. And over time, we learned about other pain points that compliance and HR professionals have beyond uncovered misconduct. Though that's the biggest one we solve. But we learned that there are other issues as well, such as outdated systems to support investigations, such as teams like HR, legal, compliance working in silos, and many other issues that we decided to solve with an end-to-end platform for essentially for all forms of misconduct or anything and everything that is difficult to report. And this, of course, includes financial and corporate misconduct, as well as what we call behavioral or interpersonal. And this platform serves both the employee through an app, and as you mentioned, with the case management, it serves the case management team through what we call the Resolution Hub. And so today we're in our third year into this journey of introducing the next generation Speak Up solutions to the modern workplace. And we've partnered with phenomenal and progressive companies that are taking the lead and go beyond compliance, really, to create safe, healthy workplaces. And it's been
I was just going to ask a question about that as you're talking about that. And sorry, is that when you're talking about that, what do you think helps you report those issues?
What helps us to report those? So let me just put it this way, because you'll hear me talking a lot about the role of technology during this call, but I don't believe technology in its own right can create a safer space and enable more speak up. I think it's means to an end. I think it's a very important means to an end that should be looked at. So it should be seriously looked at. But it comes with an intention that is set by leadership to lower the barriers to reporting and to send a very, very strong message to employees that this is an ethical organization and they expect employees to speak up, not just by publishing a code of conduct and bearing it in the intranet somewhere, but by actually equipping their people with the most forward-thinking, best-in-class options, tools, solutions to come forward and report. So I believe it starts with that message that is then kind of underpinned by action. And we're definitely seeing a growing number of organizations putting the two and two together and seeking for better options. And it's been a real great honor for us to build a company that is seen as a trusted partner to other companies on this very particular, incredibly important journey that a growing number of businesses is taking today.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to kind of, dive in bit deeper into what it means setting the intention. And it's, and for us, it's really about enabling better speak up means that you're not just ticking a compliance box, right? A recent book came out recently by Rob Chestnut. He is the former general counsel and chief ethics officer at Airbnb. It's called Intentional Integrity. Rob, by the way, is one of those incredibly progressive leaders that I look up to in the space, and he was a pleasure to work with when he was at Airbnb. I love the idea of intentional integrity, the idea that you need to be intentional about your company's ethics. And we translated that concept into the speak up world. For us, it means being intentional about the employee experience when reporting something difficult to their employer. What do people need in order to come forward in greater numbers is psychological safety. And there are different ways to enable that psychological safety. At Vault, we do it with technology, since our app provides for safe space to take record of any misconduct events, a time-stamped record, and new reporting possibilities that weren't available before for coming forward.
Okay, wow. And so, I mean, you talk a lot about the safe space and how do you help find that safe space? I know you mentioned the time stamping and also the, taking the records in that way. Are there any other parts of the technology that help in your mind for finding the safe space?
Sure. So we really wanted to not only digitize the way Speak Up happens, which, I mean, let's basically say, this better than I do. It needs some digitizing. So it's not just about putting an app to it. It's about thinking how technology can create new opportunities, new avenues for Speak Up. So we took the old ways of doing things, which are the two ways that are kind of known to man, I guess, are anonymous and non-anonymous, right? We've innovated on those. For example, we enable even anonymous reporters to have a two-way communication through a chat with their employer, with the case manager, right? So that if additional information needs to be asked or any other messages need to be exchanged, it can happen immediately, even if the person decided to come forward anonymously. So it still enables a continuous conversation. But where I think kind of, what I know our clients are particularly intrigued by, and the reason many of them are coming to us is because of Go Together. So the third way of reporting that we came up with is Go Together, which means you can only submit your record if you're not the first or only person to come forward about that particular person. And we've learned that from the Me Too movement, because even the words Me Too, what do they tell you? They tell you you're not alone, right? And that's empowering message. So we've replicated that with technology that connects the dots on any repeated patterns of harm and allowing people to come forward based on the condition that they're not alone, without, of course, knowing how many other people are involved or what's their stories. There's complete data segregation, but it enables you to come forward under that condition, and our technology on the back end will connect the dots. And what we found, which might be really interesting to female listeners of yours, is the fact that employees and women in particular are up to 8 times more likely to report with Go Together than any other way.
Okay, that's great. Let's talk a little bit now about a couple of different, newsworthy things that have, happened in the last couple of what have you seen? Let's just start with Me Too. What have you seen in terms of trends for Me Too allegations generally, and other sexual harassment ones?
For sure. So I think the biggest trend, if we're not going to kind of, I mean, it's obvious that kind of sexual harassment became, at the time, a big area of concern and worry, and it opened, and I think it really rewrote a chapter in women's rights and advance women in the workplace without doubt. Because when you shed a light at something and you force business leaders to take it seriously, you see changes on the ground, and that's exactly what we've seen. But I think that the biggest thing it taught us is that there is a big break of trust that is leading to increased employee activism, to workplace activism in a way. And we see it in the forms of walkouts, such as kind of, employee walkouts from, we saw it in Google, we saw it in so many other companies. But we also see it when employees turn to social media with their grievance, since they lost faith in the more traditional internal company avenues. Last year, Sky News published a survey of hundreds of board members that revealed that 95% of companies 95% of companies expect a rise in employees turning to social media to raise concerns or complaints about workplace misconduct. And that activism is expected to cost them 25% of global revenue. So something is broken, and that something needs fixing. The Me Too movement, in my view, highlighted it in a really big way. And it also opened the eyes of leaders to the fact that change is needed. They cannot just continue with the same old that they used to do in terms of the options they give their employees for speak up. In the context of Me Too, as I said kind of earlier, we also understood that being part of an affected group or a victim of a pattern is a terrible thing, but also a very empowering thing. So it made us think about how we harness technology in order to make it an empowering thing, right? And help people and help to kind of create that safety in numbers.
Yeah. And I think that's really a great point. And then, well, I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. But one other comment right now related to something I don't think we anticipated, at least I certainly didn't during the Me Too time, is COVID.
Yeah.
We now have had a sort of an unexpected change in the workplace environment in a way which, well, we always have talked about in the ethics and compliance field, the importance of protecting, reporters and confidentiality. But now at a time where you've got people with the layoffs related to this, people constantly working from home, concerns about job loss. What are you seeing about COVID that's out there that you may have found unique, surprising, not surprising, not much? So.
Yeah, no, definitely. We saw 4 trends happening almost kind of consecutively, right? So it started in the first couple of weeks in March. What we know by clients, kind of sharing with us what they see from using our system is that there's been a rise in it's really ugly and sad, but there's been a specific rise in discrimination against people of Asian heritage, and that happened in the first few weeks of COVID, and I can say that thankfully we see that trend now being in decline, but it has been the case in the beginning. Then a second trend that we're seeing, which I find it, the kind of the most important one, is the fact that, and I think you've alluded to this just now, Lisa, is the fact that when you add job insecurity, so take the number I was talking about, 75% of people who experience misconduct in the workplace do not come forward to their employer, right? Do not report. Now, if you add job insecurity to that trend, what you end up with is even less of an appetite or willingness to share and to report misconduct. So what we are seeing without doubt is rise in anonymous reporting. People are just far less willing to do that in name. So it's really important to enable a very clear communication channel that is also anonymous, and the ability to follow up with the employee, because for many of them, that would be the only way that they would come forward and alert the company about misconduct. But also, if you want to kind of hear about an interesting trend that we've seen. So as I mentioned, our app enables anonymous chat, right? You can chat with your case manager within your company whilst maintaining your own anonymity. And what we're seeing is employees utilizing that chat to ask questions, not even raise misconduct issue, but to ask questions about, say, maternity or paternity leave. And they're doing that through the anonymous channel because they don't want to identify themselves at a time that people are losing their jobs, left, right, and center. So it became just a very welcome channel by companies to enable that communication for a big proportion of their employees that is just scared to even ask, basic questions about what's the company's policy on family planning, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting trend on its own right, in my view, and one to kind of take note of. We've seen another issue with domestic abuse. Again, a super sad side effect of COVID is the fact that domestic abuse is on the rise, of course, for obvious reasons, and that has been reported globally. And there's a really interesting discussion happening right now about the employer's responsibility for the safety of their employees working from home, because we are being told to work from home, but not all homes are safe, right?
Right.
There's this kind of interesting discussion that is happening right now, and I can give you a real example. I'm actually even allowed to name that client, MNC Saatchi, which is a big advertising agency headquartered here in London, is using our app to also utilize domestic abuse reporting, so to enable that space, because they want to know if they need to intervene and help employees in any way. And then the final trend that I would mention is, and that's kind of obvious, and that goes across all the other three that I just mentioned here, is workplace cyberbullying. So harassment and bullying went digital, right? It went online.
Yep.
We're in a world that minimized face-to-face interactions and in-person interactions. That has now all shifted to the chat, to the team collaboration tools, to emails, and to Zoom calls. And so that's what compliance officers should take note of, is the fact that almost every bullying or harassment case, such as any other misconduct case, has digital footprint these days. And it's really important to be able to capture that when employees are coming forward and reporting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And those all, I think, are trends that are very interesting at the present. And then one thing that is really important, particularly to Mary and I, as part of this podcast, what we've added in is conversations and concerns about the Black Lives Matter movement. For me, as an American, this is something that, has become really resonant living in Washington, D.C. So I was wondering, have you seen the increases in reports of race discrimination or, racial issues as a result of BLM? And I think similarly, like as you were talking earlier about Me Too, it allows, that you're reporting, and generally the idea of having people feel less alone with their concerns. So have you seen that coming out?
Yes, and I absolutely agree with that. Parallel that you drew there, Lisa, and I see the same. So similarly to the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter started as a social uprising, right? A social outcry that quickly penetrated the workplace and became a business issue. And I think there's an added pressure that came really quickly this time around. It took longer with Me Too, but it definitely came about quicker this time. And that is that companies are required to act and not just talk. There's an expectation of action, right? Big statements of support won't do. Actually, if anything, I'm not going to name this particular company here, but there have been examples. There's been an example with a well-known sports brand, as a sports retailer, where employees were actually holding the company accountable for the fact that there's huge discrepancy, as they saw it, between their public statements and how they find the employer is dealing with systemic racism from within the company. And so if anything, big statements that are not backed by action will only do more harm and will go down less favorably by employees. So yeah.
I think it's incredibly performative, those situations. And I think it is a fascinating part of it, that the idea that if you just say the right thing and don't, do the work behind it. I think that Black Lives Matter, as you just said, really has shown that you can call that out very easily and very quickly. And not only do companies have to say the right thing, as you said, they have to actually figure out how to make systems work to encourage it.
Exactly that. The way to put it is that the only bias that has place in our world right now is to be action biased, right, against racism, and how you're really thinking about your actions and how you make sure you go beyond words. And also the fact, and again, just as you said, it's that you cannot just hand this problem over to one particular department in your company. For example, you cannot, just say from now on, this is a talent issue. Here, chief talent officer, get us up to 30% more women or more people of color by next year, right? This is a problem that requires, given it's so systemic, it's a problem that requires the entire leadership to come together and for everyone to own it. And what we're really seeing, and that's super encouraging to us at Vault, what we're seeing is a growing interest from compliance officers, from chief compliance officers, from chief risk officer, from the ethics departments that are taking interest in this and see this as something that falls under their remit, whilst in the past they didn't. Right. In the past, the way that they would portray it to us as we would, speak with these companies is that we would say, okay, so our department deals with financial, with whistleblowing and financial issues. It's our friends at employee relations or HR that deal with subjects such as racism, discrimination, and bias, but no more. You really see a growing number of chief compliance officers that feel as much responsible for the company's culture as their colleague from HR and from other departments. So it becomes a team effort. It becomes a leadership effort, and everyone has a role to play as being kind of the guardians of culture of a good, healthy culture and of equality in the workplace. And I think that's, the net impact of both Me Too and Black Lives Matter on our workplace today is positive. It goes through, it requires a lot of pain to come out, and it is painful. It really is painful. And I'm sure kind of you feel it firsthand living in DC. It really is painful to bring it all out, to bring it to light. The truth hurts, but it's a turning point, and it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that I just personally think about that, and I've said it before, is that even in the difficult and painful conversations, it's not, for me as an ethics and compliance officer and somebody who cares about these issues, it's not nearly as uncomfortable for me to speak and learn about it as it is for the people who have been living through these issues. And I think that is, being uncomfortable for a while is painful, but it's the right thing. And it's the only way that I think we're going to get better. And I think that what you say about the profession is very accurate, is that I think the view of there's in the past, there was a view of the Department of No, or how do we just talk about the law? But now I think many of us, I always call my work in ethics and compliance, regardless of people calling it compliance or something else, because I think that's so much of a part of helping a company do the right thing. There's a lot about that topic. We could go for hours on that, but I think it's true. And the other thing is, with that in mind, I'm sure you have, coming into this from the unique perspective that you have and your viewpoints. And, if you were to give any advice to these organizations today to talk about the speak up culture and with behaviors and leaders, what advice would you give us as, especially as somebody who's come into this industry with sort of a personal, feeling about it and now has really grown to know what is, going on. And as you said, as a woman now in compliance.
So that's a great question. I'll point out at four things that I believe need to be done to achieve more integrity, more ethics, more compliance through a better speak up culture. So kind of what are those four pillars of of setting up your speak up culture for success. The first one would be set the intention, right? We've already touched on that, but the intention must be to actively lower the barriers to reporting. It must be that. It's the understanding that more reports is better for you as a company. A compliance officer's success is completely reliant on the ethical culture that employees are displaying and also on employee cooperation, right? I'm sure you would agree with that as a chief compliance officer yourself. So, and I think it's really important to dwell on that point. Let's draw a parallel for a second to how doctors are being measured and evaluated, right? A doctor's success is not measured by a yardstick of no sickness or little sickness detected amongst the patients in her clinic, okay? It's measured by early detection of issues and the ability to treat them before they become acute. And in many ways, I feel like, maybe it's kind of maybe it's a bit of an odd equivalent here, but I feel there is a very clear parallel to the role of a chief compliance officer. A successful chief compliance officer is not one that only saw a handful of complaints coming up every year through their hotline that tells them that according to the latest benchmark, they're doing so well because there's, they have almost nothing revealed. That's not the benchmark here. The benchmark is to acknowledge that misconduct happens everywhere. Every organization with human beings would have misconduct at some form or another, at some point or another. And it's the idea of uncovering. It's the idea of enabling people to surface it up and to take care and to treat these issues before they become tomorrow's headlines, tomorrow's lawsuit, tomorrow's frustrated employees that leave. It's that notion. So set the intention would be kind of the first pillar of a successful speak up culture. The second one would be go beyond the checkbox. From our experience with these things, for years, Speak Up Solutions have been all about checking the compliance box, right? And we need to go way above that very low threshold when it comes to Speak Up. And that includes state of mind, but that also includes use of tools and advanced technologies for sure, going beyond that hotline and the compliance inbox, for example, or the open door policy that is, published somewhere. That includes baking in Speak Up into companies' training, onboarding, offboarding, reminding people of the importance of that in every single opportunity. And there is actually a great opening for that right now to get some buy-in from leadership, because the Department of Justice have recently published some guidance on compliance programs and how to revisit the effectiveness of compliance programs. And that gives a great business case to go beyond the box checked kind of state of mind and get your leadership to be bought in. The third pillar is remove the intermediary, and that is super important. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that trust can be outsourced, and it shouldn't be outsourced. If you want to build rapport and you want to build trust internally, you need to own it. And the way to own it is to remove as much as possible any third parties that are sitting between you and your employees and diluting the employee voice, right? The trust needs to happen very much between the teams that at the end of the day run the investigations, doing the case management, and directly with the employees. So it's thinking about those direct channels of communications that become, even more challenging but important at a time that a large proportion of our workforce is distributed right now and working from home, and you don't have the ability of knocking on the door anymore, right? Or sitting down for coffee with someone. So having that kind of personal relationship, remove the intermediary. You don't need them. Own it. And build trust from the grounds up. So that is kind of the third pillar. And then the fourth one, to close a full circle here, is drive for resolution. When we thought about how to call our case management system, and when we created a case management system for investigations, we called it the resolution hub, because we believe that cases need to be resolved, not managed, and there's a huge difference there, right? And at the end of the day, just like you and I discussed before this podcast, it's up for the company. I mean, you cannot drive to resolution and have quick and efficient investigations if that's not the intention of the company or the people who are responsible for this area. But you definitely should think about how to equip them with all the tools to run these investigations to resolution. And we believe that cases need to be resolved and managed, that compliance and ethics and employee relation teams are worthy of an advanced infrastructure that really supports them in driving to that resolution. And I'll just share a research by an expert that was looking into reporting and anonymous reporting, called James Dittert. He found that employers' failure to quickly drive for resolution increased employees' belief that speaking up was pointless by 30%. But if managers had closed the loop in the past, their report then spoke about 19% of increase in reporting, even after accounting for any increase that naturally happens simply because managers were perceived as open and interested and willing to make change. So the driving to resolution creates the perception that speaking up is a worthwhile exercise, and it's really important to send that message loudly and clearly. So yeah, that would be my 4 points.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for spending the time with us. And actually, I also want to personally thank you, as you challenged the conversations we've had, have challenged my thoughts and the way that I'm trying to think about how to do things. So I really do appreciate your personal experience and what you're doing for the compliance community. And with that in mind, thank you. Thank you all for listening. And on behalf of Mary and I and the Compliance Podcast Network, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.